Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to tackle one of the biggest questions of all. How can you really be sure that the world you see, the world you experience every single day, is, well, real?
So let's start with a little thought experiment to kind of frame our thinking. Do you think you see the world exactly as it is? Like a perfect photograph? Or is your perception more like a painting, an interpretation of reality, shaped by the artist?
Well, as it turns out, modern psychology pretty much screams that it's the painting, yeah. See, our experience isn't some crystal clear window to the outside world. Nope. It's more like a massive construction project. And your brain is the head architect, and it's working off its own very specific set of blueprints.
And this difference is absolutely crucial. You've got objective reality over here, the world as it actually is, whether we're around to see it or not. And then you've got your perception over here, the world as your brain interprets it. And here's the kicker. Perception isn't passive. Your mind isn't just taking in data. It's constantly shaping it, often seeing the world not as it is, but as it thinks it should be. So these mental blueprints, these filters, psychologists have a name for them: cognitive biases. They're basically these built-in shortcuts our brain takes that can lead us to, well, some pretty illogical conclusions. And let me tell you, one of the most powerful ones out there is confirmation bias. What this means is that your brain is basically on a mission to prove itself right, all the time. Seriously, if you have a belief, any belief, you're going to subconsciously seek out, remember, and favor any little piece of information that confirms it. And you'll just kind of ignore anything that doesn't fit. Before you know it, your reality becomes this custom-built echo chamber, just bouncing back what you already believe. Now, this whole idea that what we think is real might just be a funhouse mirror version of the truth, it's not new. Not by a long shot. In fact, we can go back more than 2,000 years to find one of the most legendary thought experiments ever.
So, the ancient Greek philosopher Plato came up with this story, his famous allegory of the cave. And he wants you to imagine this: a group of people who have lived their entire lives deep inside a dark cave.
They're chained up, facing a wall. They can't turn their heads, they can't see each other, they can't even see themselves. All they've ever known, since the moment they were born, is this one blank wall. Okay, so behind them, there's a fire, and people are walking back and forth in front of this fire, carrying different objects. What do the prisoners see? Just shadows. Shadows dancing on the wall in front of them. For these prisoners, those flickering shadows are reality. That's it. That's the whole world. They have no concept that anything else even exists. And this is where it gets really interesting. Plato lays out what happens next. One prisoner is freed. He's dragged out of the cave and into the real world. And the sunlight is so blindingly painful he can barely see. But slowly, his eyes adjust and he realizes, oh my gosh, my entire life has been a lie. But then, when he goes back to the cave to tell his friends the amazing news, what happens? They don't believe him. In fact, his eyes are now used to the light, so he's stumbling around in the dark. They look at him and think the journey broke him, that the outside world is a terrible, dangerous place, and they choose to stay right where they are, with their shadows. This story from ancient Greece, it perfectly sets the stage for a massive debate that's still happening in science today. Think about it. When scientists talk about things we can't see, like atoms or quarks, what are they really describing? Are they describing the actual objects making the shadows? Or are they just describing the shadows themselves? Only, with more math. Yeah, this gets right to the heart of a huge debate in the philosophy of science. All those things that physics tells us about, atoms, electrons, quarks, all this stuff we can't possibly see with our own eyes, what is science actually telling us about them? So you've basically got two teams in this debate. On one side, you have the scientific realists. They believe that our best scientific theories are true descriptions of reality, both the stuff we can see and the stuff we can't. To them, an electron is just as real as a dinosaur bone. But then you have the other side, the anti-realists. They're more cautious. They say, hold on a second, science's job is to explain what we can observe. For them, things like electrons aren't necessarily real entities. They're more like useful tools that help us make incredibly accurate predictions. Going back to the cave, they'd say we can get really, really good at predicting how the shadows will behave, but we can never know for sure about the objects casting them. Now, the realists have a really powerful argument on their side. It's often called the no miracles argument. And it goes something like this. Look at our technology. Lasers, GPS, computers, All of this stuff is built on scientific theories about unobservable things like electrons. It would be an absolute miracle if all this technology worked perfectly, but the theories behind it were completely wrong, right? There's just no way.
But the anti-realists have a killer comeback. They just point to the history of science, which is basically a giant graveyard of theories that were once super successful but turned out to be totally wrong. You had the phlogiston theory to explain fire, the ether theory for how light travels. For a while, these theories worked. They made good predictions. But we now know that phlogiston and the ether, they don't exist. So the anti-realists ask, what makes you so sure that our theories about electrons won't end up in that same graveyard one? Okay, so this debate has been going on for centuries, but now it's gotten a high-tech 21st century upgrade. I'm talking about the simulation hypothesis. This is basically Plato's cave, but for the digital age. The idea is that our entire reality, you, me, the stars, everything, is actually just an incredibly sophisticated computer simulation. We are the shadows, and the real world is just some supercomputer running the whole program. But before you have a full-on existential crisis, physicists have a pretty big objection to this. They point out that trying to simulate our universe, especially down at the bizarre, super complex quantum level, would be, well, basically impossible. You'd need a computer that is more complex than the entire universe itself just to run the simulation. And when we actually study the universe, we don't find the glitches or shortcuts you'd expect a programmer to use. Instead, the deeper we look, the more ridiculously complex it gets. Okay, so where does all of this leave us? It kind of feels like we're adrift, right? We've got the biases in our own heads telling us one thing, and the very nature of the universe being a giant question mark. It's a lot to take in. So what do? Well, the philosopher David Hume had some pretty good advice. He called it mitigated skepticism. Basically, it's about finding a balance. Be skeptical, question things, challenge your own assumptions, accept that there are limits to what we can ever know for sure. But, and this is the important part, don't let that doubt completely paralyze you from living your life. Hume's point was that we ultimately trust our senses not because we have some logical proof that they're perfect, but just because we have to. It's habit. It's just how we're built. But that little dose of skepticism, it's the perfect tool to fight back against those cognitive biases we talked about at the start. It keeps you humble. It reminds you to stay open to the idea that your own personal painting of reality might not be the whole picture. And that really brings us to the big takeaway. Look, whether our reality is a painting, a shadow on a cave wall, or a bunch of code, we're here. This is what we've got. The perception we have is the one we have to work with. So maybe the most important question isn't, is any of this real? Maybe the better question is, knowing that my view is limited, how do I choose to live in the world I see? So how are you going to choose to live in your cave?